Ethnography of the Otomi. Episode 2. An Otomi cemetery near Ixmiquilpan with simple grave markers. The Otomi were the first ethnic group to settle in the Mezquital Valley in the state of Hidalgo. Despite the arid climate and land unfit for agriculture without irrigation, the Otomi people learned to depend on the production of maguey agave, or in English the century plant. The Otomi are actually known as the people of the maguey because they use the plant as a food, a fuel, a medicine, and even an alcoholic beverage called pulque. The fact is, the maguey is integrated into virtually every aspect of their lives, not the least of which was in the construction of their houses. Dried leathery maguey leaves shingle the gambrel roofs of Otomi homes supported by rafters made of the tough 30-foot-long dried flower stalks, which grow from the center of the older plants. Impressively, this ancient people had learned to use the only materials the harsh desert environment provided them. Written, photographed, and podcast video produced by Jack Lamb. Dr. Terry Stalker and Jack Lamb. Photograph taken in 1981 as we ascended the 18,500 feet volcano, Pico de Orizaba, to explore, survey, and photograph the lost Aztec mines. Stumbling upon an Otomi school north of Ixmiquilpan. We reached Ixmiquilpan late in the day. So to camp for the night we drove north of the city to a small lake we saw marked on the map. While we never did find the road to the lake before nightfall, we nevertheless found an acceptable place to set up camp just north of a small pueblo named Sabanillas. Early the next morning, after driving less than a mile back towards Ixmiquilpan, we noticed children carrying books entering a one-story, white stucco school building with a metal roof. The roofing was memorable because the 18-inch corrugations alternating with smaller crenellations gave the appearance of a row of volcanoes demarcated by lesser hills. "Hey, pull in here," Stalker directed. "Aren't those kids going into that school, Otomi? Let's check it out." The dusty bare schoolyard in front of the building provided room to park, so I pulled in before the door. "Terry, we cannot barge into a school," Barbara chided. "School hasn't started yet, and anyway, we won't be but a minute," he argued, having made up his mind. The door to the two-room schoolhouse was open for ventilation, so when the teacher saw the blue goose, he came out to greet us. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, and dressed smartly in an open-collar knit shirt, bell-bottom slacks and penny loafers. "Barbara, you talk to him," Stalker directed. "Ask first if his students are Otomi." "Okay," she replied, raising an eyebrow in approval as she appraised the teacher. "Buenos dias, dice usted algo?" The teacher asked her. "Good day. Is there something you wanted?" "Buenos dias, señor, disculpinos por interrumpir. Dimos su escuela y nos preguntamos si sus alumnos eran Otomis." She asked with a smile. "Good morning, sir, please forgive us for interrupting. We saw your school and wondered if your students were Otomi?" "Sí, todos los niños son Otomis, igual que yo. Esta es una escuela Otomi," he responded good-naturedly without disinclination. "Yes, all the children are Otomi, as am I. This is an Otomi school." Barbara explained our ethnographic interest in the Otomi and asked if he would answer a few questions about the school. Introducing himself to us as Andres Ambrosio, he was eager to answer her interrogations. Then without hesitation, he allowed us to photograph his classroom and observe him teaching his students. She began by asking him what subjects he taught. "¿Qué temas les enseña a los alumnos? Puesto que los niños solo hablan Otomi cuando llegan por primera vez a la escuela, debo enseñarles a hablar español antes de que puedan aprender a leer y escribir o a sumar y restar." Andres responded in an approachable and affable manner. "Since the children only speak Otomi when they first arrive in the school, I must teach them to speak Spanish before they can learn to read and write or add and subtract." He admitted it took years to teach the children to speak fluent Spanish because they came from illiterate families who only spoke Otomi at home. As a case in point, Andres revealed he did not learn to speak Spanish until the age of 15. Since he proved a quick learner, he was able to earn an education, but not all his students would be as fortunate. He said he became a teacher to help his people separate themselves from the cultural pride keeping them isolated in ancient Otomi traditions, and thus, separate from mainstream Mexican culture. En la última década he notado un cambio en el tradicional estilo de vida Otomi. ¿Cree que algún día las etnias culturales de su pueblo desaparezcan por completo? Stalker interposed a question. In the past decade I've noted a change in the traditional Otomi lifestyle. Do you foresee the day when the cultural ethnicities of your people will disappear entirely? Un cambio no estaría mal. La supervivencia de mi pueblo no está en la lengua y cultura Otomi, sino en el idioma español y la cultura mexicana. Andrés replied, change would not be a bad thing. The survival of my people is not in the Otomi language and culture, it is in the Spanish language and the Mexican culture. Stalker understood the dichotomy confronting a traditional culture when facing extinction in a modern world, which alas rarely allows an indigenous people to survive except as a sideshow for tourists. The options for survival for members of such ancient cultures are limited. They can struggle ineffectually to remain unchanged until the larger culture around them finally subsumes their homes, their land, and their habitat before forcing them to disperse. Or they can watch their children slowly drift away, seduced by the material possessions the outside world offers. Either way, it is only a matter of time before their traditions are lost and their culture dies out. 16 students ranging in age from 6 to 12 crowded into 6 desks, while 3 children stood outside listening to lessons through the window. The children acted like students in any classroom, except they perhaps listened more intently than others might have done. At least, we never saw them whisper to each other while their teacher lectured. With minds uncluttered by the barrage of diversions distracting most youths in the modern era, perhaps these Otomi students could better focus on learning. But then, coming from an oral tradition where there was little need to stimulate minds to prepare them for traditional schooling, it might be harder for them to relate to the material in the deliberate manner needed to acquire a firm base of knowledge to build upon in subsequent years. The students wore clean clothes, but only one girl wore the traditional white dress that Andrés said was once worn by every Otomi child. Apparently, the older traditions were already changing for the Otomi. Terry, Barbara, and I stayed in the back of the room and listened silently while Andrés taught his class alternately in Otomi and Spanish, though I sometimes crept forward to snap photographs of the attentive faces of the students. At first, it mystified us why a girl sat at her desk sucking on a razor blade held loosely in her lips. And then we saw her hand it off to a classmate who used it to sharpen his pencil. I bet it wasn't long ago when a student would have used an obsidian razor to sharpen pencils. Stalker remarked as he raised an eyebrow in pensive reflection. I recalled what I recently learned at the International Obsidian Conference in Pachuca, Hidalgo, how under an electron microscope, the edge of the sharpest surgical scalpel appears jagged and irregular, whereas the edge of an obsidian razor is smooth and even. So, few if any cells rupture when an obsidian knife makes an incision, dramatically hastening the rate of healing. The one molecule-wide cutting edge of an obsidian razor more often than not incisors between cells instead of lacerating through them. Andrés said the other class was composed of older children in their teens. But they stayed home this time of year to help with the work and agrarian lifestyle required, for every family member had to work hard if the Otomi way of life was to survive. He said it took a strong commitment for the students to come to school each day because some had to walk up to 6 kilometers each way. The teacher also said that he and the school principal, Elena, continuously struggled to convince the students' parents it was to their advantage to allow their children to come to class and get an education. Regrettably, Andrés blamed himself when parents sometimes pulled their children from the school because as Otomi, they did not understand why an education was important. When the other teacher arrived in a VW van much newer than the Blue Goose, the children ran out to greet her. Elena was older than Andrés, but she was just as well educated and as modern in her checkered blouse, red jeans, and Amerindian moccasins. With hair unbound to her waist, she possessed a beauty we had not seen in other Otomi women whose looks reflected the harsh lifestyle their lives forced on them. After Andrés introduced us to Elena, she and Barbara hit it off instantly and talked non-stop about the school while Stalker and I listened. But their conversation cut short when children began filing into Elena's van for what appeared to be a planned school outing. ¿Va a llevar a los niños a algún lugar esta mañana? Barbara asked her, are you taking the children somewhere this morning? Aunque no enseño cuando los alumnos más grandes trabajan en casa, levo diariamente a los niños a que almuercen. ¿Nos acompaña? Elena replied with a smile, even though I am not teaching while the older students work at home, I drive in daily to take the children to eat an early lunch. Will you join us? Gracias que lindo. Disponemos de sala si algunos niños le gustaría andar con nosotros. Barbara said happily, thank you, that would be nice. We have room if some of the children would like to ride with us. 3 of the 10 children going on the outing climbed into the back of the Blue Goose with Barbara, while the rest rode with Elena. As soon as everyone settled, I followed when she drove away from school. We assumed we were going to Ixmiquilpan because we were heading south, but then Elena turned onto a trail intersecting from the southeast, which we failed to notice when we looked for the lake road the previous evening. She led us across a barren rolling terrain soon turning into hills, and not too long after, the lake appeared ahead of us after we crested a steep rise. As soon as we stopped on the shoreline, the students and teachers piled from the vans and straightaway began collecting twigs and branches, sticks and dead wood, all of which they placed in a pile near a large boulder. And in a matter of minutes, using the heap of combustibles, teacher Elena had a fire burning as the dry wood quickly conflagrated into a roaring blaze. Meanwhile, Andres talked to a shirtless fisherman standing in the shallows casting a net into the lake with great dexterity. Since the man was already here waiting for the class to arrive, we assumed he must be the father of one or more of the children. Each time he cast out his net, he caught 2 or more sizable perch-like fish, which he handed to a waiting youngster who immediately brought them to Elena. From somewhere on her slim person, Elena produced a knife and knelt to gut the fisherman's catch. As each of the fish was scaled and cleaned, she handed them to girls, who skewered them on sticks sharpened by boys with pocket knives, before roasting them over the flames. The process was a paradigm of efficiency as student and teacher alike knew his or her roles to ensure the lunch was speedily prepared. I noticed 2 boys searching the rocks on the hillside for game, one carrying a long stick with a cord tied to one end ending in a slip noose. It did not take them long to find prey, and with a deft flick of his wrist the boy with the stick flipped the istly noose over the head of a coiled rattlesnake and pulled it tight. In a moment, the snake died struck in the head with a rock wielded by the other boy. And together they carried it back to Elena, who sliced it open and eviscerated the carcass before placing it on the coals to roast. Though dead, the snake writhed in the flames as heat released energy stored in its recently living nervous system. When Elena said she was taking the students to eat lunch, it never occurred to me they'd catch the meal live and cook it in the wild. Stalker remarked in awe. For our part of the meal, Barbara dug out the jars of peanut butter and jelly and the loaves of bimbo bread she had purchased earlier. The P&B was a big hit with the children once they began to eat. It was fascinating to watch the teachers and students devour the fish and rattlesnake, skillfully picking out the bones with their front teeth before spitting them to the ground. Despite their contemporary appearances, they were Otomi at heart, adept at living off the land. Lunch took less than an hour. And after everyone ate, the children helped the teachers put out the fire and clean up the terrain with the same degree of efficiency they displayed in preparing the meal. So Stalker's impulsive decision to stop at the school that morning had turned into a remarkable ethnographic experience none of us would ever forget. He sometimes acted overly bold when he bluntly inveigled us into the daily lives of the Otomi people we studied. Nevertheless, the anthropologist would never learn anything of value without forcing a first contact. It was time for the students to go back to school for the afternoon classes. And since Stalker still wanted me to photograph the church in Ixmiquilpan, with regret we said goodbye to our new friends and their charges. Once all the children and teachers climbed into Elena's van, we followed them back to the main road. But when they turned north to Sabanillas, we turned south towards the Otomi city of Ixmiquilpan. Pre-Columbian murals in a post-Columbian church. A very prosperous city populated by 10,000 Otomi, Ixmiquilpan bustled with mid-afternoon activity by the time we arrived. As usual, our road led us to the plaza at the center of the municipality where a bronze statue of a nude woman holding a drawn bow with arrow nocked and ready stood atop a large fountain. This surprised me since it appeared unlikely Otomi men would publicly display what I assumed was the nude female form of one of their ancestors. After all, most of the Otomi men we met enforced a chaste traditional dress code on their women. "You never told me the Otomi had a female warrior class," I remarked as I drove past the bronze statue. "Wait until you read the plaque," Stalker replied, mysteriously giving me the impression he concealed some fact about the archeress. After parking the van, we walked to the fountain to study the sculpture, which told me nothing new. But on reading the bronze plaque inset into the fountain's base, I discovered the statue depicted the Roman goddess Diana of all things, and had nothing to do with Otomi. Who would guess there would be a naked statue of a Roman goddess in the middle of a city filled with Otomi Amerindians? Stalker asked rhetorically, having set me up for the unusual revelation. Loaded down with camera gear, we made our way to the fortress-like structure containing the murals Stalker deemed significant. We drew near a massive church, the Augustinian convent of San Miguel the Archangel, built a decade after the Spanish Conquest but not finished until 1550. Constructed of plastered stone to repel attacks, massive flying buttresses supported the towering height of its sheer walls. In pre-Columbian times, Otomi were the fiercest of the mercenary warrior groups fighting for their Aztec rulers. He explained animatedly as we approached the church. It's believed Otomi would hire out to anyone willing to pay for their services, and supposedly would sometimes even agree to fight for both sides in a conflict, and battle against one another to the death. When Cortez's conquistadors conquered the Aztec, the Otomi were put out of a job, so they turned on the Spaniards. Unfortunately, this of course didn't work out too well for them. He continued. Then after the Otomi were defeated, the Spanish forced them to build this church to a Christian god they did not even know. We entered the huge church through a small door set into the massive 20-foot-tall wooden portals hung on 5 hand-wrought hinges each. Built for defense, a lone bell tower loomed high above the entryway as we entered the church. Walking past partitions separating the portal from the nave, we stood beneath a lofty vaulted ceiling and gazed down the aisle towards the apse and altar. The colored mural panels Stalker spoke of encircled the church's interior, filling both walls to left and right, as well as the wall behind the altar. Starting at the left, we viewed each panel in turn, as one might view paintings in a museum. As we slowly circled the church, he expounded on the unique nature of the frescoes, pointing out varying aspects of the artwork displaying both European and Aztec stylistic elements. The Otomi painted these murals in the 16th century as part of their corvée, a work service required by their new Spanish overlords. Stalker explained with keen interest. Then later in history some church official must have ordered the murals painted over, and soon no one remembered they existed until the 1960s when workers discovered them during a church renovation. Their existence must have surprised quite a few of the priests and clergy. I whispered. Just imagine what it would mean to find hidden pre-Columbian murals in a post-Columbian church, he exclaimed. I studied the colorful scenes painted in brown, red, blue and black pigments depicting a battle between warriors fighting across a stylized blue vine, wielding bows, clubs, and swords. A few of the combatants emitted scroll-like images from their lips which Stalker called speech scrolls, strikingly similar to the speech balloons drawn by comic book artists today. Portraying speech scrolls as images and not words seemed apropos, since the Aztec never developed a written alphabet. Attracted to the headpiece worn by the chief in the nearby frescoes, he pondered aloud. The similarity of the headpieces suggests the theme of these murals is a military conflict between newly converted Christian Otomi and those Otomi who denied Christianity. This mural depicts a battle between pre-Columbian indigenes, he intoned excitedly. The jaguar and eagle headdresses tell me one of the combatants must have been Otomi, since that's the way the Aztec depicted their best warrior corps in the codices. As a badge of honor, all elite Aztec warrior corps were called Otomi. I snapped a few frames before following him into the sacristy where more battle scenes covered the walls. Stalker stopped before the image of a jaguar with an arrow piercing its body. Pre-Columbian cultures represented military victory with portrayals of one god prevailing over another. He explained eagerly. The jaguar was a major deity in pre-Columbian warfare, so the arrow may symbolize the victory of the Christian god over the god of those Otomi unwilling to join the Catholic Church. Look at the weapon this warrior holds. See the protrusions on the wooden blades? He said, directing my attention to the black projections edging the sword. That's a macuahuitl. Embedded with prismatic obsidian blades, it would slice through a warrior like a hot knife through butter. And look! He added excitedly after he studied the mural. The victorious warrior shown below the slain jaguar wears the same headpiece as the one worn by the converted chief in the other room. The archaeologist continued to study the murals in silence for a full 10 minutes before he spoke again. Look at the beardless face painted on a shield, he remarked in awe-inspired admiration. I wonder if it's a beardless depiction of Jesus. I say this only because I've never seen a face painted on a New World shield before. So I'm guessing it must be a European practice, because it's damn well not Mesoamerican. Stalker would not let us leave until I captured every one of the murals on film. Then we gathered up our gear and walked out of the church. As we started putting the camera gear back into the Blue Goose, Terry suddenly had an idea. Hey, since San Juan del Rio is 60 miles from here, I think it's about time we swing by my favorite winery and pick up the 2 cases of wine we agreed to buy. Naturally, Barbara and I seconded his suggestion. By the time we reached the winery, the distribution office was about to lock up for the day. So moving faster than he liked, Stalker selected 2 cases of a 6-year-old Rioja, Vino de Hidalgo. And minutes after pulling into the winery, we were driving to Tula with the wine cases stowed in back. Barbara, open a bottle of wine, will you? Stalker asked his wife, who sat on the bed in the back of the van. We might as well make up for lost time and drink a bottle right away. Rummaging through the sundry items in the dry sink, and finding the corkscrew, Barbara extracted the cork and filled 3 wine glasses, handing 2 forward for her husband and me, while keeping the third. Stalker raised his glass and intoned a lengthy toast. Por los ausentes, los presents, y por quienes no pudieron estar aquí. He droned in Spanish. Say what? I asked, uncomprehending his chant. Translating his toast for my benefit, Barbara recited in a measured tempo. For the absent, the present, and for those who just couldn't make it. I'll drink to that. I replied with a sardonic chuckle. Lifting my glass above my shoulder outside the range of my vision, I waited for the double clink of their glasses against mine before bringing it to my lips. It's as fine as I remembered, Stalker exclaimed. The superb vintage exhibited a subtle rich bouquet underlying a heavy, fruity flavor. Best of all, it was dry, which is probably why we emptied a second bottle before we pulled into Tula. Look for the next podcast episode of Ethnography of the Otomi, Episode 3.